Karim al-Rashid stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse suite, gazing at the glittering Dubai skyline. The view before him was worth millions, just like everything else in his life. At 38, he had achieved what most people could only dream of: a real estate empire that stretched across the Emirates, a fleet of luxury cars, and a social status that opened every door in the city's elite circles. Yet as he adjusted his custom-made suit and checked his reflection in the window, a familiar emptiness gnawed at his heart. In just a few hours, he would be hosting an engagement party at the Burj Al Arab, announcing his upcoming marriage to Layla Khalil, daughter of one of Dubai's most prominent banking families. The union was perfect on paper, a merger of wealth, influence, and social expectations. The sound of his phone buzzing interrupted his thoughts. It was Layla, probably, calling about last-minute arrangements for the party. He let it ring, his mind drifting to a different time, a different place. His fingers unconsciously traced the outline of an old photograph he always kept in his wallet, but never dared to look at anymore. The memories came unbidden. The smell of jasmine in the evening air, the sound of water trickling in an ancient oasis, and the feeling of sand between his toes as he ran through his childhood village. But most of all, he remembered Amira, the girl with eyes that sparkled like desert stars, and a laugh that could make flowers bloom in the sand. A knock at the door jolted him back to reality. "Mr. Al-Rashid, your car is ready," his assistant announced through the intercom. Karim straightened his tie and pushed the memories away, as he had done countless times before. But today they seemed more persistent, more vivid. As he descended in the private elevator of his building, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Layla, but a message from his family's longtime butler back in the village. The news hit him like a sandstorm. His father had fallen seriously ill. The message was clear. He needed to return home immediately. The timing couldn't have been worse. The engagement party was tonight. Contracts worth billions were pending, and the thought of returning to the village filled him with a mixture of dread and longing he couldn't quite explain. Yet, something deep within him stirred at the prospect of going back. In the car, Karim made calls to postpone the party, much to Layla's displeasure. "Darling, you can't just cancel tonight. Do you know how many important people are coming?" Her voice dripped with barely contained frustration. "This isn't about the guests, Layla. It's family," he replied firmly, ending the call before she could protest further. As his driver navigated through Dubai's gleaming streets, Karim's mind wandered back to the last time he had seen Amira. It was 20 years ago, under the old acacia tree by the oasis. He had given her a silver bracelet engraved with words that now seemed like a distant dream. "Until the desert blooms again," it read, a promise he had failed to keep. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of desert sunsets. In a few hours, he would be leaving this world of glass and steel for the simple mud-brick houses and narrow alleys of his childhood. What scared him most wasn't the journey itself, but the possibility of confronting everything he had left behind. His assistant had already arranged for his private jet to be ready within the hour. As the car pulled up to his office building for one last meeting, Karim caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, he didn't recognize the man staring back at him. Immaculately dressed, perfectly groomed, yet somehow incomplete. Maybe, he thought, it was time to face the past he had spent 2 decades trying to forget. The village hadn't changed much in 20 years. As Karim's luxury SUV navigated the narrow dirt roads, each familiar sight struck him like a physical blow. The old market square where he used to buy dates with his allowance, the community well where women still gathered to chat, the modest schoolhouse with its peeling paint. Everything seemed frozen in time, preserving memories he had tried so hard to forget. His family's house, once the grandest in the village, now stood as a silent testament to passing time. The garden his mother had so lovingly tended was overgrown, and the walls needed a fresh coat of paint, yet it still maintained an air of dignity that spoke of better days. Hassan, the elderly butler who had served his family for 3 generations, waited at the entrance. His weathered face broke into a smile that made Karim's throat tighten with emotion. "Welcome home, young master," he said, using the same words he had spoken every day of Karim's childhood. Inside, the house smelled of cardamom and coffee, bringing back a rush of memories. His father rested in the master bedroom, attended by the village doctor. The sight of the once powerful man looking so fragile shook Karim to his core. After a brief conversation filled more with meaningful looks than words, Karim retreated to his old bedroom to collect his thoughts. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, the stack of old books on the desk, even the small box where he had kept his childhood treasures. He opened it with trembling hands, finding the other half of the photograph he always carried, him and Amira, aged 18, sitting beneath their special tree. A commotion outside drew him to the window. A group of children was leaving the schoolhouse across the street, their laughter carrying on the warm afternoon breeze. And then he saw her. Amira stood in the doorway, her hair covered by a modest hijab, watching the children leave with a gentle smile. She was their teacher now, he realized with a start. Time had been kind to her. Though no longer the carefree girl he remembered, she carried herself with a quiet grace that made his heart skip a beat. Without thinking, he found himself walking, out of the house and across the street, drawn to her like a moth to flame. She saw him when he was halfway there. The stack of books she was carrying slipped from her grasp, scattering across the dusty ground. Their eyes met, and 20 years vanished in an instant. "Karim," she whispered, his name on her lips sounding exactly as it had all those years ago. He rushed to help her collect the books, and their hands brushed briefly. The contact sent electricity through his veins. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the subtle silver threads in her hair, each mark of time making her more beautiful than the girl in his memories. "I heard about your father," she said softly, regaining her composure. "The village has been praying for his recovery." Her voice was careful, measured, but Karim could detect the undercurrent of emotion she was trying to hide. As he helped her stack the last of the books, he noticed something that made his heart stop. She was wearing the bracelet. After 20 years, the silver had tarnished, but the engraved words were still visible. She caught him looking and quickly pulled her sleeve down to cover it. "I should go," she said, stepping back. "I have papers to grade," and she gestured vaguely toward the modest house visible at the end of the street. Karim noticed it wasn't her family's old home, the beautiful two-story building with the blue door, where he had spent so many afternoons of his youth. "What happened to your house?" he asked, before he could stop himself. A shadow crossed her face, and she clutched the books tighter to her chest. "Life happened, Karim. Not all of us had the luxury of choice." The words weren't bitter, just matter of fact, but they stung nonetheless. Before he could respond, a man's voice called out, "Amira!" She turned, and relief flickered across her features. "My fiancé," she explained quickly, not meeting Karim's eyes. "I really should go." She hurried away, leaving Karim standing in the schoolyard, the desert wind carrying the scent of jasmine and lost chances. The village hadn't changed much in 20 years. As Karim's luxury SUV navigated the narrow dirt roads, each familiar sight struck him like a physical blow. The old market square where he used to buy dates with his allowance, the community well where women still gathered to chat, the modest schoolhouse with its peeling paint. Everything seemed frozen in time, preserving memories he had tried so hard to forget. His family's house, once the grandest in the village, now stood as a silent testament to passing time. The garden his mother had so lovingly tended was overgrown, and the walls needed a fresh coat of paint. Yet, it still maintained an air of dignity that spoke of better days. Hassan, the elderly butler who had served his family for 3 generations, waited at the entrance. His weathered face broke into a smile that made Karim's throat tighten with emotion. "Welcome home, young master," he said, using the same words he had spoken every day of Karim's childhood. Inside, the house smelled of cardamom and coffee, bringing back a rush of memories. His father rested in the master bedroom, attended by the village doctor. The sight of the once powerful man looking so fragile shook Karim to his core. After a brief conversation, filled more with meaningful looks than words, Karim retreated to his old bedroom to collect his thoughts. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, the stack of old books on the desk, even the small box where he had kept his childhood treasures. He opened it with trembling hands, finding the other half of the photograph he always carried, him and Amira, aged 18, sitting beneath their special tree. A commotion outside drew him to the window. A group of children was leaving the schoolhouse across the street, their laughter carrying on the warm afternoon breeze. And then he saw her. Amira stood in the doorway, her hair covered by a modest hijab, watching the children leave with a gentle smile. She was their teacher now, he realized with a start. Time had been kind to her. Though no longer the carefree girl he remembered, she carried herself with a quiet grace that made his heart skip a beat. Without thinking, he found himself walking, out of the house and across the street, drawn to her like a moth to flame. She saw him when he was halfway there. The stack of books she was carrying slipped from her grasp, scattering across the dusty ground. Their eyes met, and 20 years vanished in an instant. "Karim," she whispered, his name on her lips sounding exactly as it had all those years ago. He rushed to help her collect the books, and their hands brushed briefly. The contact sent electricity through his veins. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the subtle silver threads in her hair, each mark of time making her more beautiful than the girl in his memories. "I heard about your father," she said softly, regaining her composure. "The village has been praying for his recovery." Her voice was careful, measured, but Karim could detect the undercurrent of emotion she was trying to hide. As he helped her stack the last of the books, he noticed something that made his heart stop. She was wearing the bracelet. After 20 years, the silver had tarnished, but the engraved words were still visible. She caught him looking and quickly pulled her sleeve down to cover it. "I should go," she said, stepping back. "I have papers to grade and—" She gestured vaguely toward the modest house visible at the end of the street. Karim noticed it wasn't her family's old home, the beautiful two-story building with the blue door where he had spent so many afternoons of his youth. "What happened to your house?" he asked, before he could stop himself. A shadow crossed her face and she clutched the books tighter to her chest. "Life happened, Karim. Not all of us had the luxury of choice." The words weren't bitter, just matter of fact, but they stung nonetheless. Before he could respond, a man's voice called out, "Amira." She turned, and relief flickered across her features. "My fiancé," she explained quickly, not meeting Karim's eyes. "I really should go." She hurried away, leaving Karim standing in the schoolyard, the desert wind carrying the scent of jasmine and lost chances. The roar of a helicopter shattered the peaceful morning silence over the village. Karim looked up from the documents he'd been reviewing, old bank statements and property records that raised more questions than answers about his father's involvement in the Amira's family situation. The sleek black helicopter bearing the Khalil Industries logo was landing on the outskirts of the village, causing a stir among the locals who had never seen such a display of wealth in their modest community. Layla stepped out of the helicopter, like a fashion model stepping onto a runway, her designer dress and high heels completely out of place among the dusty streets. Her arrival sent ripples of whispers through the gathering crowd. Women peered from behind curtains, and children stopped their games to stare at the spectacle. "Surprise, darling!" she called out, walking toward him with practiced grace. "I couldn't bear the thought of you dealing with all this alone." Her smile was perfect, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. Karim knew her well enough to recognize that this wasn't a simple, supportive gesture from a concerned fiancé. "You shouldn't have come," he said, keeping his voice low as he guided her into the house. "This isn't Dubai, things are different here." Layla's perfectly manicured hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Different? Like that woman I saw you with yesterday?" Her tone was light, but there was steel beneath it. "My father's associate saw you at the Oasis with her. A school teacher, Karim." "Really?" The fact that she had him watched didn't surprise him as much as it should have. "Amira is an old friend," he replied carefully. "Nothing more." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Layla's laugh was like crystal breaking. "Friend? The way you looked at her, I've never seen you look at me like that." She moved to the window, looking out at the village with barely concealed disdain. I had my private investigator look into her background. Such a sad story. Family. Lost everything. Forced to sell their beautiful home. Now she lives in that tiny house teaching children for pittance. The casual cruelty in her voice made Karim's jaw clench. Why are you really here, Layla? She turned to face him, all pretense, dropping from her expression. To remind you of who you are now, darling. You're Karim al-Rashid, one of Dubai's most powerful businessmen, my future husband. This village, these people, they're your past. A charming story to tell at dinner parties, nothing more. Before Karim could respond, Hassan appeared at the door. Young master, your father is asking for you. The old butler's eyes darted briefly to Layla, his expression carefully neutral. We'll continue this later, Karim said, moving toward the door. Layla caught his arm again. Don't take too long, darling. I've arranged a lunch meeting with some of Father's business associates who are in the area. They're very interested in, discussing the development potential of this quaint little village. The words stopped Karim in his tracks. Development potential? Layla's smile was triumphant. Daddy thinks this area would be perfect for our new resort project. The locals would be fairly compensated, of course. They could finally leave this. She waved her hand dismissively. Simple life behind. The implications hit Karim like a sandstorm. This wasn't just a jealous fiancé checking up on him. This was a calculated business move. The village, his childhood home, Amira's world. They wanted to transform it all into another soulless tourist attraction. As if summoned by his thoughts, he caught sight of Amira through the window, walking to her classroom. She paused, looking up at the house, and their eyes met briefly before she hurried on. Layla followed his gaze, her expression hardening. Oh, and darling, she called as he reached the door. I think it's time we announced our engagement officially, here in the village tomorrow night. I've already started making arrangements. Her voice carried the weight of an ultimatum. Karim left the room without responding, his mind racing. Between his father's mysterious involvement in Amira's family's troubles, Layla's sudden appearance, and this new threat to the village's existence, he felt like he was standing on shifting sand. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he could hear the ticking of a clock, counting down to a moment of truth he couldn't avoid much longer. In his father's study, Karim found himself surrounded by the ghosts of the past. Old photographs lined the walls, business meetings, handshakes, celebrations of deals closed. His eyes caught on one particular image, his father and Mr. Khalil, 20 years younger, standing in front of the village bank. The date stamp showed it was taken just weeks before Amira's family lost everything. Hassan entered silently, carrying a stack of dusty ledgers. Your father asked me to give you these, he said, placing them on the massive oak desk. He said you'll find your answers here. The old butler's hands trembled slightly as he arranged the books. You knew, didn't you? Karim asked softly. All these years you knew what really happened. Hassan's weathered face creased with sadness. It wasn't my story to tell, young master. But perhaps it's time you learned the truth about why you were sent away so suddenly all those years ago. Karim opened the first ledger, and the story began to unfold through columns of numbers and carefully annotated transactions. His father and Mr. Khalil had been partners in a scheme to acquire land in the village at depressed prices. They had systematically pressured local families, calling in loans, manipulating property values. Your father resisted at first, Hassan explained, pointing to entries from 20 years ago, but Mr. Khalil had leverage, evidence of some irregular transactions that could have ruined your family's reputation. He threatened to expose everything unless your father cooperated. The pattern became clear as Karim flipped through the pages. Amira's family hadn't been the only victims, but they had been the first. Their resistance to selling had made them an example to others. The bank had called in their loans suddenly, giving them no time to recover. A knock at the study door interrupted his reading. Amira stood in the doorway, her presence causing his heart to skip. I'm sorry to intrude, she said formally. The school board asked me to deliver these renovation proposals. Her eyes fell on the open ledgers, widening in recognition. You found them, she said quietly. I always wondered if those books still existed. She moved closer, her fingers hovering over the pages that documented her family's fall from prosperity. "Why didn't you tell me?" Karim asked, his voice rough with emotion. "All these years I thought, what could I have said?" Amira's voice was tired. "That your father and your future father-in-law conspired to drive my family into bankruptcy. That the man you admired so much chose his business interests over basic human decency." Before Karim could respond, Layla's voice rang out from the hallway. "Darling, where are you?" Her heels clicked against the marble floors, coming closer. Amira stepped back quickly, but not before Layla appeared in the doorway. Her perfect eyebrows arched at the scene before her. "Well, isn't this cozy?" The wealthy businessman and the village schoolteacher poring over old books together. "How quaint." "Ms. Khalil," Amira acknowledged with quiet dignity, "I was just leaving." She gathered her proposals, but Layla blocked her path. "You know, my father told me all about your family," Layla said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Such a shame about what happened, but really it was for the best. Progress requires sacrifices. Karim saw Amira's shoulders stiffen, but her voice remained steady. "Progress? Is that what you call destroying people's lives for profit?" Layla laughed, the sound like ice cracking. "Destroying? Please, look around you. This village is stuck in the past. Our new resort project will bring jobs, tourism, opportunity. Unless, of course, you're not interested in opportunity." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to Amira's modest clothing and worn shoes. "Some things are worth more than money," Amira replied, finally pushing past Layla. At the door, she paused. "Your father taught me that lesson 20 years ago, Ms. Khalil. I wonder what else runs in the family." After she left, Layla turned to Karim, her eyes blazing. "You need to end this little village romance, darling. The announcement party is tomorrow night, and I won't have some schoolteacher with a grudge ruining our plans." But Karim barely heard her. His mind was racing through the implications of what he'd discovered. The resort project wasn't just about future development. It was the final move in a game that had started 20 years ago. And tomorrow night's party wasn't just an engagement announcement. It was meant to be a victory celebration for the Khalil family's complete takeover of the village. The village was transformed for the engagement party. Workers imported from Dubai had erected elegant tents in the town square, their white fabric billowing in the desert wind. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate poles, and expensive carpets covered the sand. The contrast between this temporary luxury and the village's simple beauty made Karim's stomach turn. In his old bedroom, he adjusted his designer suit while watching the villagers gather outside, their curious faces illuminated by the elaborate lighting system. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from Layla about last-minute arrangements, but he ignored them all. Instead, his attention was fixed on the ledgers spread across his bed, their pages filled with evidence of decades of manipulation. Hassan appeared at the door, his face grave. "Young master, there's something else you should know." The old butler closed the door carefully before continuing. "Your father, he's been trying to make amends. The illness that brought you here, it's partly from the stress of fighting Mr. Khalil's latest demands." Karim turned sharply. "What demands?" "Mr. Khalil wants to build his resort on the oasis land. Your father has been refusing to sell his share of the water rights. It's the last thing preventing them from starting construction." A knock interrupted them. It was Ahmad, Karim's cousin, who had arrived that morning from Riyadh. "The guests are arriving," he announced, then paused, taking in Karim's troubled expression. "Though you look more like a man heading to his sentencing than his engagement party." After Ahmad left, Karim walked to his window, his eyes drawn to the schoolhouse across the street. Light still burned in Amira's classroom, despite the late fee hour. He could see her silhouette moving about, probably preparing for the next day's lessons, steadfast in her routine despite the chaos unfolding around her. The sound of helicopters filled the air as more guests arrived from Dubai. Among them was Mr. Khalil himself, his imposing figure visible as he descended onto the makeshift helipad. Karim watched as the man embraced his daughter, their matching expressions of triumph unmistakable even from a distance. "Hassan," Karim said suddenly, "I need you to deliver a message." He scribbled a note quickly and handed it to the butler. "Make sure Amira gets this before the party starts." In her classroom, Amira was indeed preparing lessons, though her hands trembled slightly as she wrote. The party's lights filtered through her windows, a harsh reminder of the evening ahead. When Hassan arrived with Karim's note, she almost refused to take it. But the old butler's insistence made her relent. The note was simple. "Meet me at our tree, 1 hour before the party, please." Meanwhile, Layla was holding court in the main tent, directing staff and greeting early arrivals. Her designer gown sparkled under the chandeliers, but her eyes kept darting to the schoolhouse across the square. She pulled her father aside, speaking in urgent whispers. "Are you sure everything is in place?" she asked. Mr. Khalil's smile was cold and confident. "By tomorrow morning, the contracts will be signed, and this quaint little village will be on its way to becoming the most exclusive resort in the Emirates. Your engagement party is just the beginning, my dear." What neither of them noticed was Ahmad lingering nearby, his face thoughtful as he observed their exchange. He made his way through the growing crowd to find Karim, who was still in his room. "Cousin," Ahmad said without preamble, "I think you should know what I just overheard." But before he could continue, Layla burst in, her face flushed with irritation. "Darling, what are you doing up here? The guests are arriving and—" "Oh, Ahmad, I didn't see you there." Her smile was brittle as she grabbed Karim's arm. "We need you downstairs now." As Karim allowed himself to be led away, his eyes met Ahmad's, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. Whatever his cousin had discovered would have to wait. The next hour would change everything, one way or another. The old acacia tree stood as a silent guardian of secrets as Karim waited in the gathering dusk. The party lights from the village square cast long shadows across the sand, their artificial brilliance unable to dim the emerging desert stars. He touched the rough bark of the tree, remembering how many times he and Amira had met here in their youth, sharing dreams that seemed both innocent and impossible now. The soft sound of footsteps in sand made him turn. Amira approached, still wearing her teaching clothes, the silver bracelet catching the starlight. She stopped a few feet away, maintaining a careful distance. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Karim said softly. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes taking in the elaborate party preparations visible in the distance. "I found something today," she finally said, pulling a worn envelope from her bag, "while packing up my classroom for the supposed renovation." It was hidden behind an old cabinet. She held it out to him with slightly trembling hands. The envelope contained photographs and letters, evidence that his father had tried to warn Amira's family about the Khalil's plans all those years ago. "He tried to stop it," Karim whispered, realization dawning. "That's why they forced him to send me away to Dubai." "Your father made a choice in the end," Amira replied, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "He chose to protect you instead of us. Mr. Khalil threatened to ruin your future if he didn't cooperate." The truth of the past 20 years began to crystallize. "And now they're trying to finish what they started," Karim said, his hand clenching. "Around the documents. The resort project, the engagement, it's all part of their plan to take control of the village. Why did you ask me to come here, Karim?" Amira's question hung in the air between them. "To share more painful memories? To apologize for something you didn't even know about?" He stepped closer, close enough to see the tears she was fighting to hold back. "I asked you here because I need to know if I'm too late. The bracelet, you still wear it. Does that mean anything?" Amira's hand went to the silver band unconsciously. "It means I was young once and foolish enough to believe in promises. And now?" He took another step forward. "What do you believe in now?" Before she could answer, a voice cut through the darkness. "How touching." Layla emerged from the shadows, her evening gown incongruous against the desert backdrop. "Really, Karim, meeting your old flame under a tree. It's like something out of a romance novel." Ahmad appeared behind her, slightly out of breath. "I tried to stop her," he said to Karim, "but she overheard me telling you about the contracts." "Contracts." Amira looked between them, confusion evident on her face. Layla's laugh was sharp and cold. "Oh, didn't your beloved Karim tell you? Daddy's lawyers have already drawn up the papers. By midnight tonight, when we announce our engagement, he'll also be signing over his family's water rights to the Khalil Corporation. The resort project begins construction next week. Is this true? Amira asked Karim, her voice barely a whisper. I would never sign those contracts, Karim replied firmly, his eyes locked on Amira's. Just like I'm not going through with this engagement. The sound of Layla's sharp intake of breath was drowned out by approaching footsteps. Mr. Khalil emerged. From the darkness, flanked by two men in business suits. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, my boy, he said smoothly. You see, I own controlling interest in your Dubai operations now. One word from me, and your entire empire crumbles. Then let it crumble, Karim replied, surprised by the relief he felt at saying the words. He reached for Amira's hand, finding it trembling but firm in his grasp. Some things are worth more than money. The engagement party was in full swing when Karim walked into the main tent, Amira still by his side. Their entrance caused an immediate stir, the wealthy businessman and the village teacher hand in hand, facing the crowd of Dubai's elite. Mr. Khalil's face darkened with rage, while Layla stood frozen, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips. I have an announcement to make, Karim's voice carried across the suddenly silent gathering. But perhaps Mr. Khalil would like to make his announcement first, about the real reason for tonight's celebration. Ahmad stepped forward, holding up a leather portfolio. I have here the original contracts from 20 years ago, he declared, and evidence of how the Khalil Corporation has been systematically buying up water rights across the region, creating artificial shortages to force local communities to sell their land. The murmurs among the guests grew louder. Several prominent investors began to shift uncomfortably, recognizing the implications. Mr. Khalil moved toward the center of the tent, his practiced smile barely masking his fury. This is hardly the time or place for business discussions, he said smoothly. We're here to celebrate my daughter's engagement to one of Dubai's most successful young businessmen. No, Karim replied firmly. We're here because you wanted witnesses to what you thought would be your final victory over this village. But I have witnesses of my own. He nodded to Hassan, who opened the tent flaps. The village elders entered, led by the imam from the local mosque. With them came representatives from other communities that had faced similar pressure from the Khalil Corporation. Each carried documents, evidence of the systematic manipulation that had destroyed so many lives. Your father was weak, Mr. Khalil spat at Karim, his composure finally cracking. He could have been part of something great, but he chose to protect worthless sentiments over progress. My father, Karim's voice rang out, chose honor in the end, and so do I. He turned to address the gathered crowd. The Al-Rashid family is returning all the lands acquired through these manipulated deals to their rightful owners, starting with the house that belongs to Amira's family. Layla's laugh cut through the tension. You're choosing to throw everything away for her? She gestured dismissively at Amira. You'll be ruined in Dubai. No one will do business with you after this. Perhaps, a new voice interjected. The crowd parted to reveal Sultan Al-Mahri, one of the most influential business leaders in the Emirates. Or perhaps Dubai is ready. For businessmen who understand that true progress doesn't come at the cost of our heritage and values. The Sultan turned to Mr. Khalil. Your resort project proposal is rejected. My committee will be launching a full investigation into your business practices. He smiled warmly at Karim and Amira. We need young people who remember their roots, who understand that the future must be built on honor, not greed. As Mr. Khalil and his supporters hurriedly left the tent, many guests following in their wake, Karim turned to Amira. She was staring at him with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something that made his heart race. The house, she began, but he gently touched her cheek, silencing her. Is just the beginning, he said softly. Everything I built in Dubai, all the success, it meant nothing because I was building it alone. I don't want that life anymore. Under the crystal chandeliers, with the desert wind carrying the scent of jasmine through the tent. Karim saw their past and future merge into a single perfect moment. The silver bracelet on Amira's wrist caught the light, its engraved promise finally ready to be fulfilled. Dawn broke over the village, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The elaborate party decorations from the previous night stood in stark contrast to the simple beauty of the morning, a reminder of how quickly things could change. Workers were already dismantling the crystal chandeliers and removing the expensive carpets, erasing all traces of the Khalil's attempted takeover. In Amira's classroom, students whispered excitedly about the events they'd witnessed. The story had spread through the village like wildfire, how Karim al-Rashid had chosen their teacher over the beautiful Dubai heiress, how he had exposed the truth about the Khalil Corporation's schemes, and how the Sultan himself had intervened. Amira tried to maintain normalcy, but her hands trembled slightly as she wrote on the blackboard. The silver bracelet caught the morning light, its meaning transformed from a reminder of loss to a symbol of hope. A knock at the classroom door made her turn. Hassan stood there holding a set of keys. "The paperwork is complete," he announced with a warm smile. "Your family home is yours again." The children burst into spontaneous applause, their joy infectious. Outside the school, the village was buzzing with activity. Representatives from the Sultan's office had arrived to begin the process of reviewing and reversing the fraudulent land deals. Many families would soon reclaim properties they had lost years ago. Karim spent the morning in meetings with village elders, working to establish a foundation that would protect the community's interests. His phone rang constantly with calls from Dubai, business partners wanting to distance themselves from the Khalils, journalists seeking statements, and even old friends expressing their support. "The Sultan's office has frozen the Khalil Corporation's assets pending investigation," Ahmad reported, reviewing messages on his tablet. "Their entire empire is crumbling. Layla and her father have fled to their estate in Switzerland." But Karim's attention was elsewhere. Through the window, he could see Amira leading her students in a reading circle under the shade of a tree. She looked up, somehow sensing his gaze, and their eyes met across the distance. "You know," Ahmad said thoughtfully, "everyone expected this scandal to destroy you in Dubai. Instead, you're being hailed as a reformer, someone who chose integrity over profit. The Sultan's support changed everything." "I didn't do it for Dubai," Karim replied quietly. "I did it because 20 years ago I made a promise under an acacia tree. It just took me this long to keep it." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village square, Karim walked to the schoolhouse. Amira's students were leaving for the day, their excited chatter filling the air. She stood in the doorway, watching them go, just as she had on the day he first saw her again. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly, reaching for her hand. The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. Home meant both the house she had lost and regained, and something larger, more profound. Together, they walked through the village streets toward the blue-doored house that had witnessed so much of their story. Neighbors called out greetings, their faces warm with approval and recognition. This was what progress really looked like. They seemed to say, not in gleaming towers and luxury resorts, but in the restoration of what was right and true. At the front door of her family home, Amira hesitated. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You have a life. And Dubai, responsibilities." Karim's answer was interrupted by the arrival of the Sultan's personal assistant, carrying an official-looking envelope. "Mr. al-Rashid," the man said formally, "His Highness requests your presence tomorrow morning. He has a proposal about establishing a new development fund, one that will help preserve traditional communities while promoting sustainable growth." The meeting with the Sultan proved transformative. In his opulent palace, surrounded by both modern luxury and traditional Arabic architecture, Karim and Amira presented their vision for the village's future. They proposed a development plan that would preserve the community's character while creating sustainable opportunities for growth. "Education will be our foundation," Amira explained, her quiet confidence filling the ornate meeting room. "We'll establish a cultural center where our children can learn both traditional skills and modern technology. The Sultan nodded approvingly as she outlined programs to preserve local crafts, agricultural techniques, and storytelling traditions. Karim followed with the business framework. Instead of a resort that would overshadow the village, we propose a series of small, locally owned guest houses. Visitors can experience authentic village life, learn about our culture, and contribute directly to the community's economy. The Sultan's approval came with substantial funding and, more importantly, protection for the village's autonomy. As they left the palace, Karim caught Amira's hand. "You were amazing in there," he said softly. "You spoke about the future as if you could already see it." "I can," she replied, touching the silver bracelet. "I see it every day in my students' eyes. They deserve to inherit a village that's growing, not disappearing." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The cultural center took shape in a restored traditional building, its courtyard filled with the sounds of children learning traditional music and dance. Local artisans began teaching workshops, passing on skills that had nearly been lost. Amira's classroom became a hub of innovation, where students learned to use tablets and computers, while also studying the desert ecosystem that had sustained their ancestors for generations. She developed a curriculum that bridged the old and new, earning recognition from educational institutions across the region. Karim found himself rediscovering his homeland through new eyes. He worked alongside village craftsmen, learning the techniques his own grandfather had known. In the evenings, he and Amira would walk to their acacia tree, planning and dreaming under the desert stars. One evening, as they sat beneath the tree, Amira noticed Karim seemed distracted. "What's wrong?" she asked, concerned by his unusual quietness. "I received an offer from an international investment group," he admitted. "They want me to lead their sustainable development projects across the Middle East. It would mean traveling, being based in Dubai again." Amira's hand tightened on his. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I'd consider it on one condition." He turned to face her fully. "That the headquarters be established here, in the village. We can create jobs, bring in expertise, but keep our roots where they belong." Tears sparkled in Amira's eyes as she understood the implications. He wasn't choosing between his old life and his new one. He was finding a way to blend them, to create something entirely new. The transformation of the village became a model for sustainable development across the region. International delegations visited to study how traditional communities could thrive in the modern world without losing their soul. But more than the economic success, it was the restoration of pride and purpose that marked the true change. 6 months after the failed engagement party, the village had become a beacon of possibility. Delegations from similar communities across the Middle East arrived regularly, eager to learn how tradition and progress could coexist. Each visitor brought their own stories of struggles against developers who threatened their way of life. In the cultural center's main hall, Amira led a workshop for teachers from neighboring villages. Her innovative curriculum, blending traditional wisdom with modern education, had caught the attention of the Ministry of Education. As she demonstrated how students could use technology to document and preserve local traditions, Karim watched from the doorway, his heart swelling with pride. "The Australian delegation is here," Ahmad announced, appearing at Karim's side. "They're interested in applying our model to Aboriginal communities." The news brought a smile to Karim's face. Their small village's influence was reaching across continents. Later that afternoon, Karim and Amira walked through the village's newly established marketplace. Local artisans displayed their crafts in beautifully restored traditional stalls. The sound of children learning traditional music drifted from the cultural center, mixing with the calls of vendors and the laughter of tourists experiencing authentic village life. "Remember when you first came back?" Amira asked, pausing to admire a display of hand-woven textiles. "Everything seemed so impossible then." "Nothing's impossible with the right person by your side," Karim replied, his fingers intertwining with hers. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the sunlight, its engraved message as meaningful now as it had been 20 years ago. They reached their acacia tree just as the sun began to set. The oasis had been transformed into a protected heritage site, ensuring it would remain undisturbed for future generations. Small solar-powered lamps designed to mimic traditional oil lanterns cast a warm glow over the area. "I received a letter from Layla today," Karim said quietly. "The investigation into her father's business practices is complete. She apologized for her role in everything and asked for forgiveness." Amira squeezed his hand. "And what did you tell her?" "That forgiveness is part of moving forward. That's what you taught me." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You've taught me so much about what really matters in life." The sound of approaching footsteps made them look up. A group of village elders, led by the imam, approached with formal dignity. With them came Hassan, carrying a beautifully decorated box. "It's time," the imam said simply, his eyes twinkling. Karim nodded, suddenly nervous despite all his planning. Hassan opened the box, revealing a delicate golden bracelet that matched the silver one Amira had worn for 20 years. But this one carried a new inscription, "As the desert blooms eternal." Under the acacia tree where their story began, surrounded by the legacy they had built together, Karim knelt on one knee. The village elders formed a circle around them, witnesses to a moment that symbolized not just a union between two people, but the bridging of past and future. "20 years ago, I made you a promise under this tree," Karim began, his voice thick with emotion. "I gave you a bracelet as a symbol of that promise, but I wasn't ready to keep it then. Now, I offer you another bracelet, and with it, a new promise to spend the rest of my life proving that true love, like our village, only grows stronger with time." The wedding preparations transformed the village into a celebration of both heritage and hope. Unlike the ostentatious engagement party the Khalils had planned, this event grew organically from the community itself. Women gathered to prepare traditional decorations, their practiced hands weaving palm fronds into intricate patterns. Young girls learned ancient songs passed down through generations, their voices carrying across the evening air during rehearsals. The cultural center became the hub of activity, with local artisans creating everything from the wedding canopy to Amira's dress. She had insisted on wearing traditional bridal attire, but with a modern twist. The fabric was adorned with subtle patterns that told their story through traditional symbols: an acacia tree, a school book, 2 bracelets intertwined. "Your students have a surprise for you," Hassan told Amira one afternoon, leading her to the courtyard. There, her class had arranged a special performance, a play they had written themselves, depicting the village's journey from tradition to transformation. The children had incorporated both ancient storytelling techniques and modern theatrical elements, perfectly embodying the bridge between past and future that their teacher had helped build. International media caught wind of the upcoming ceremony, seeing it as a symbol of the region's evolving approach to development. Requests for coverage poured in, but Karim and Amira remained firm. This would be a village celebration, not a media spectacle. "The Sultan has sent his gift," Ahmad announced, presenting an ornate document. It was official recognition of the village as a protected heritage site, ensuring its cultural significance would be preserved for generations to come. Along with it came approval for an expanded educational initiative that would make their cultural center a training hub for other communities seeking to follow their model. In the evenings, as the wedding day drew closer, Karim and Amira would escape the preparations to sit beneath their acacia tree. They watched the sun set over a village that had become more than either of them had dreamed possible. The guest houses were fully booked with visitors from around the world, eager to witness not just a wedding, but a testament to the power of choosing love over profit, tradition over erasure. "Do you remember," Amira asked one such evening, "when you first came back and everything seemed so impossible?" She touched both bracelets now adorning her wrist, the old and the new, silver and gold, past and future. "Nothing's impossible," Karim replied, drawing her close. "We proved that, our village proved that." He gestured to the thriving community before them. Solar panels gleamed on traditional rooftops, children played traditional games on tablets, and the sound of the call to prayer mixed with the gentle hum of modern life. The night before the wedding, a special ceremony took place in the school courtyard. Each of Amira's students presented a message to be sealed in a time capsule, sharing their hopes for the village's future. These would be buried beneath the acacia tree, to be opened by future generations. As the moon rose over the desert, casting silver light across the preparations, the village hummed with anticipation. Tomorrow would bring not just a wedding, but a celebration of everything they had fought to preserve and everything they dared to become. The old ways and the new had found harmony here, proving that progress didn't have to mean loss. The wedding day dawned with a gentle desert breeze carrying the scent of jasmine and new possibilities. The ceremony site had been prepared beneath the ancient acacia tree, its branches adorned with thousands of tiny lights that mimicked the stars. Traditional carpets lined the pathways, hand-woven by village artisans, with patterns that told stories of love through generations. Amira stood in her childhood home, now restored to its former beauty, as the village women helped her prepare. Her wedding dress combined the elegance of traditional design with subtle contemporary elements. The two bracelets on her wrist, silver and gold, caught the morning light, symbols of a journey that had come full circle. In another part of the village, Karim prepared with equal care. His traditional wedding attire had been crafted by the same artisans who now supplied the cultural center's workshops. As Hassan helped him with the final details, the old butler's eyes glistened with pride. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. "Not of the wealth you built, but of the man you became." The Sultan himself had arrived to attend the ceremony, choosing to sit among the villagers rather than in the special section prepared for dignitaries. International guests mixed with local families, all equal participants in this celebration of love and community renewal. As Amira walked toward the acacia tree, the village children lined her path, scattering rose petals and singing traditional wedding songs. Their voices carried the wisdom of the past and the promise of the future. Each child wore a combination of traditional dress and modern accessories, a living symbol of the harmony their teachers had achieved. The Imam began the ceremony with words that resonated across the gathering. "Today we celebrate not just the union of two hearts, but the marriage of tradition and progress, of past and future." He spoke of how Karim and Amira's love had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of an entire community. When it came time for their vows, Karim and Amira chose to honor both old traditions and new beginnings. They recited ancient prayers passed down through generations, then shared personal promises that spoke to their unique journey. "Under this tree 20 years ago, I gave you a silver bracelet and a promise I couldn't keep," Karim said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Today I stand here not as the man who left, but as the man who returned, who learned that true wealth lies not in what we build for ourselves, but in what we preserve for others." Amira's response moved many to tears. "You came back not just to me, but to yourself. Together we proved that love, like our village, doesn't have to choose between honoring its roots and reaching for the sky." As the Imam pronounced them husband and wife, a flock of white doves was released into the desert sky. The village erupted in celebration, traditional music blending with contemporary songs, ancient dances performed alongside modern ones. The Izu feast that followed showcased local cuisine prepared by village families, served alongside dishes from around the world, representing their community's new role as a bridge between cultures. As the sun set on their wedding day, Karim and Amira returned to the acacia tree. The time capsule their students had prepared was buried beneath its roots, containing messages for future generations. Above it, they planted a young acacia sapling, a new tree for new beginnings. "Look," Amira whispered, pointing to the horizon. The last rays of sunlight illuminated the desert, and there, amid the sand, tiny green shoots were pushing through the earth. Desert flowers blooming out of season, as if nature itself was celebrating their union. Under the deepening desert sky, surrounded by the community they had helped rebuild, Karim and Amira held each other close. Their story had become more than just a tale of two people finding their way back to each other. It was a testament to the power of love to transform not just hearts, but entire communities. The desert had bloomed again, just as the bracelet had promised, proving that some loves, like some traditions, only grow stronger with time. Dear listeners, we hope this tale of love, tradition, and transformation has touched your hearts. Karim and Amira's journey shows us that true progress doesn't mean forgetting our roots, but nurturing them to grow in new ways. If their story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring narratives that celebrate the power of love and community. Leave a like if you believe in second chances and share your thoughts in the comments below. Our next story awaits, ready to take you on another emotional journey through the landscapes of the heart. Remember, like the desert flowers that bloom, against all odds, love always finds a way. See you in our next tale.